In this final lesson of the day, or of the chapter, I should say, what we want to talk about here is the last progressive president, a guy who's going to take over, and he's going to run all the way pretty much up through the end of World War I, which is going to be 1918. So what you're going to see here then in the election of 1912, you're going to see Woodrow Wilson run as a Democrat. That's the guy who's going to lead us all the way up to 1920. You can see him here. Many Democrats like Woodrow Wilson. You're going to see, for the first time in American history, at least in a long time, we're going to see a really competitive race where there's three political parties. Now, you know that there's typically only two political parties, right? You know there are Democrats and Republicans. And for the most part, those Democrats and Republicans, it's like 50-50 in our country. Really, it's not anything crazy like where you might see that like half of America supports one group of people, half of America supports another group of people. It's not like that at all. Army, less than half, or it's all one side or the other. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. It's about 50-50. You can see it there in the chart. And we're going to add a third political party here because, as we mentioned in yesterday's lesson, as the election of 1912 comes in, and we're going to see the end of William Howard Taft's time in office, because remember, he took power in office in like 1908. So what you're going to see here then is Teddy Roosevelt want to get back in the ring because he really thought that Taft was going to break that system of cooperation and regulation that he'd worked so hard to put into place by busting up too many of those trusts. So what we're going to see here in this last section is how there'll be a three-way runoff between Taft, the Republican, between Teddy Roosevelt, who's going to come back and say, I want to be president again, creating his own party called the Progressive Party or the Bull Moose Party, and you're going to see Woodrow Wilson want to be the Democrat. So again, just break it up. You got the Republican Party, which is going to split pretty hardcore into diehard Republicans who are going to go for Taft, 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 Taft. Progressive Republicans are going to switch parties for this election and vote with the Progressive Party, the Bull Moose Party. And then, of course, Teddy Roosevelt, who says, you know what, I'm out of the Republican Party, and I'm taking those progressive Republicans with me. I'm going to make the Progressive Party. It's going to be called the Bull Moose Party because I'm fit as a bull moose. That's the line that Teddy says when he's asked if he's ready for president. He says, I'm fit as a bull moose. And let me tell you, like, bull moose, it's crazy, crazy, man. We'll see tomorrow in class. We'll do some bull moose stuff in class. And you get the Democrats like Woodrow Wilson. Now, if you're thinking that, like, what's going to happen here? What does this look like? Like, if you took this original graph, which was the two parties, Republicans and Democrats. We'll resize this one so they're about the same size so you can get a feel for what we're talking about. And you've got a country with two parties about 50-50 split, right? And then you add in a third party. Well, in this case, what happens here, and you can see it right above my head, the Republican Party diehards are going to stay with Taft. It's going to be very, very small number of Republicans stay with Taft. But they're not going to switch votes. They're going to vote Republican no matter what. The Bull Moose Party picks up most of those Republicans that you can see right there under my lightsaber. And then most Democrats are going to stick with Wilson. There are some that will switch over and vote for Teddy Roosevelt and the Progressive Party, but not too many. So what you're going to end up with here is this three-way race where it's going to be really close between the Bull Moose Party, the Progressive Party of Teddy Roosevelt, and the Democratic Party of Woodrow Wilson. How it all plays out, though, depends upon the voters. And you better bet your bottom dollar that each of these candidates is going to try really hard to make the best argument they can to capture enough votes to take the election, because everybody's worried about who and how many will flock to Teddy Roosevelt and the Progressive Party and vote for him instead of their traditional Democrat or Republican Party. Roosevelt, for his part, gets out there and calls all of his programs the New Nationalism. Remember, Roosevelt, speak softly and carry a big stick. That concept that Roosevelt is going to really promote that American pride. Oh yeah, America, yeah. That's the idea that Roosevelt's going to kind of embrace here by saying, look, America, number one, our economic dominance, because we have those monopolies that are good monopolies. Back off the Taft trust busting, back to the square deal, common sense approach. Two, I'm going to make sure that I increase regulation only where it makes sense, only where it's going to help society, and only when I absolutely have to if business can't fix the problem itself. Three, there are two classes of people that I'm definitely going to help, definitely going to protect. Women, kids, in the workforce. Notice it's not women and kids, period. It's women and kids in the workforce. That's the people that Roosevelt's going to focus on because he knows there's a large number of them that could vote either Republican or Democrat, and he wants their votes to be for him in the Bull Moose Party. Now, on the flip side, Woodrow Wilson's going to say, you know what, I appreciate all that nationalism nonsense, but what I'm going to call this is the new freedom. And this idea of the new freedom is the concept that Wilson puts forward, which is that freedom is way more important than government regulation. That freedom is way, way, way more important than simply big business doing what it wants to do and government telling it what to do. Wilson's plan, Wilson's idea, is that government needs to restore competition. Wilson comes out and says, you know what? Americans should be free to choose. Americans should be free to work for who they want to work for. Americans should be free to work for the wage they want to work for. Americans should be free. That's the message that I need to deliver as president, says Woodrow Wilson. I'm going to break up as many trusts as I can because those trusts prevent our freedom. Those trusts keep us from choosing, and that's the essence of freedom. That's liberty, the freedom to choose, right? The freedom to choose. It's a very competitive argument. Both sides have strong support. But because the Republican vote splits, and you can see that in this chart here, not enough Republicans are going to go with Teddy Roosevelt, and not enough Democrats are going to go with Teddy Roosevelt for him to win. Woodrow Wilson is going to win the popular vote of only 42%. That's still going to be enough to make him President of the United States. But that still means that more than half of our country didn't want this guy. They don't want him. More than half the country doesn't want our president. That's going to be a significant challenge for Wilson as he faces a lot of problems at home. Some people are going to say he's not progressive enough. Some people are going to say he's too progressive. So let's see kind of how this will play out for him now that Wilson's elected. As president, the interesting thing here, at least for what we've talked about before in the past, is that a lot of the things that people were really upset about at the beginning of the 1900s that populists wanted to get taken care of with the People's Party are going to come back now, almost 14 years later, and they're going to emerge as policies of the progressive side of President Wilson now that he's won the election. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that people really wanted to talk about was how can the federal government pay for all of these things that it needs to do to help society? Because our Constitution, when it was initially passed, did not allow for an income tax. Our government in Washington, D.C. could not tax our income. They got taxes from different ways, but not from our income. This needs to change if our government's going to provide services for us to keep us safe, make society better. So the 16th Amendment is passed, and that 16th Amendment is going to allow our government to collect taxes. Now that raises a big question about what kind of tax we should collect, and they settle on something called a graduated tax on income, or a graduated income tax. Here's how it works. It's really pretty simple, and you can see it there where it says a person makes more. A person with a large income is going to pay more in tax than a person with a small income. Now, if you're a visual learner, you kind of need to see that to understand what that means. You can take a look at this little chart, and hopefully this will help you out. So in green are the incomes, and essentially what this is saying is that you make, if you're on the left, less than if you're on the right. So as you're going here, the incomes gradually go up. Graduated, gradual. And as you make more, so the person over here, for example, as they make more over time, slowly the taxes will go up too. A graduated income tax. The more you make, the more you pay in taxes. So like if you were to draw a line over from this person here who makes the most on the right, you drew a line over for his taxes, he pays more in taxes than some people even make in income, like over here on the right. That's designed as a way to keep the system fair. Not equal, but fair. It keeps wealth out of the hands of too few people and puts it in the hands of most Americans. That's the idea anyway. And it definitely targets some of those robber barons and people with outrageous fortunes who are making a ton of money. That graduated income tax definitely targets them. And Wilson also says, it's not enough for the government to collect money. We have to be sure that the money of our average everyday people are safe. Because one of the things that I know you looked at last year were a lot of bank failures, and when banks would just collapse for no reason at all because they weren't very successful or very smart with their money. So I drew a little circle here with green in it, and it says bank, and that represents all the money that a bank has from all of its people that it's deposited. Okay, and you come to your bank, you're supposed to be able to get your money out of there, right? That's how that works. But if the bank makes bad investments, you're going to show up. You say, hey, bank, you got my money? And they don't have it. You don't have my money? What are you talking about? You don't have my money? You don't have my money? Am I going to come over there? You don't have my money. You better get my money, pal, huh? You better get my money. Anyway, the point here I'm saying is that he supports, Wilson supports one of the most important laws in our history. It's called the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. I know it sounds dull and it doesn't do anything crazy revolutionary, but it does protect us in ways that had never been protected before. What it says, really clearly, is that a bank has to keep some of its money, the part I just did in the red circle for say, in a special Federal Reserve Bank that keeps it safe. So that, heaven help us, if something terrible happens and this whole bank begins to shrink, or something terrible happens and the bank begins to lose its money, oh no, that it still has a reserve it can rely on, that it can call that reserve back and say, hey, reserve, come back from the federal bank. And then all of a sudden, that reserve comes back from the federal bank and they've got a little bit more money and they can keep safe in the long term. That's a really big deal. Keeping part of our money in the Federal Reserve banks gives us a cushion against unexpected losses. The other big thing that Progressive Wilson wants to do is end child labor, but here's the interesting thing. The Supreme Court actually says he can't do that. He can't end child labor because it's not something Congress is allowed to do to tell the states what and who can work in what state and what the rules are in your state, that the government in Washington can't tell your state what your rules are when it comes to citizens of your state working. So it has to be something that we're going to see over time slowly change, where state by state by state by state, they're going to pass child labor laws until almost all the states have them, and then eventually all the states do have them. But it is an attempt. He does pass the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act. He encourages it. He signs it. It is found unconstitutional, but it will at least start the nation moving in the direction of ending child labor in our country, which you might be surprised to find out tomorrow isn't fully gone all the way. And be that as it may, even though there are still some child workers out there, I think it's safe to say that we can really judge the legacy of progressivism as we approach 1920 here in America. As we get through those first 20 years of the 1900s, what we can see is that the government of our country is now definitely going to take steps to protect workers and regulate business. The question from this point forward, from 1920 all the way to the end to the present day, the question is how much? How much should we protect workers? How much should we regulate business? Not should we, it's how much should we? And then tied to that is going to be the beginnings of a kind of a pushback against laissez-faire, where we're going to say, at some level, we're not just going to regulate business, we're going to regulate the economy, like we did with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And ultimately, we're going to try and solve social problems, so that whether that's housing or food, pure meat and drug, or Pure Food and Drug Act, I should say, whether it is Keating-Owen child labor, we're going to try and fix social problems as long as our system itself isn't too corrupt. So there's a summary of the progressive system and some of the legacies of progressivism, and we'll pick up with some of the foreign policy issues of Wilson's presidency in upcoming chapters. So let's get ready for tomorrow.